Wonderful to see the Japanese Grand Prix of Suzuka in the spring, but there were two grass fires trackside today. They brought out the red flag, plus a big shunt for Jack Doohan in the Alpine, and Fernando Alonso beaching the Aston Martin coming out of the first Degner. So a very interrupted second practice for the Japanese Grand Prix. Practice one was okay, but of course the track was picking up grip. There were some lessons learned about the tyres, about the degradation being not too bad, and therefore potentially it might still be a one-stop strategy at Suzuka, despite this being the hardest in the Pirelli compound range. The compounds themselves, particularly the medium and the soft, a little bit softer than last year, in the hope that we might have a two-stop strategy. Well, that's what they said anyway. I don't really mind. I quite like one-stop races. But putting that to one side, it looks as if it could well be a one-stop race. There was some crosswind, there was some tailwind. It was wonderful to see the Formula One cars again. And if we put aside all the interruptions in FP2 and try to draw some conclusions, the first one is that the McLaren Mercedes, no surprise here, absolutely superb around this wonderful circuit, owned by Honda, created by Honda, designed by John Hugenholtz, the Dutchman who also designed Zandvoort. And it was on the back of his work at Zandvoort that Honda then commissioned him to do the Suzuka track, the figure eight track. McLaren looked brilliant. I thought Lando Norris, as I mentioned to Cameron a little bit earlier this week, totally in tune with Suzuka. His touch was great. And one of the key elements, I think one of the ways in which you can really see if a driver's confident and how well he's facing up to the challenges of Suzuka is through turn 6 at the top of the S's. It's the right-hander, which leads, of course, into 7, Dunlop, as it's also known, the long left-hander, which then has a straight afterwards. And how you set up for 7 is how you do 6. And it was just beautiful to see Lando coming out of 6 in the middle of the road, asking nothing of the car as he set it then up for 7. Most of the other runners, Charles Leclerc, good example, leaning on the car a little bit more, coming out of 6, having to do a little bit more change of direction going into 7. And it's those little details that then affect the acceleration runs of the cars at Suzuka as distinct from traction. Acceleration, medium, high-speed acceleration, absolutely critical at Suzuka. How you actually go up through the S's in itself, very, very important, obviously, to be absolutely online, to be set for turn 6, to make sure you got turn 6 absolutely right. So you're really setting up the car for turn 6 at the beginning of the S's, but who's actually quick through the S's doesn't necessarily translate into who's quick over the Suzuka lap as a whole. It is about acceleration runs and having the car free with very little load as early as possible. And this is what Lando was doing so well. He never really seemed to get sector 3 perfect in terms of traffic or braking for the chicane, things like that. And so actually it was Oscar Piastri who was slightly quicker on the soft tyres in FP2, but for me, to my eye, Lando just looked like he's in a class of his own this weekend. I'll be very surprised if he doesn't dominate the Grand Prix. Oscar, for his part, definitely improved. He definitely improved in the Sector 3 as well, and he looks great up the hill, but he is asking a little bit more of the car than Lando. That will manifest itself in terms of tyre management and obviously deg, and it will manifest itself also in these acceleration runs that Lando's so able to put together. Another great part of the Suzuka circuit is going into turn 1. It tightens up into turn 2. I've often mentioned on live streams that in my mind that's kind of 1A, 1B. It's almost one corner. And the beauty of turn 1 is it does have this camber, and you can go in a little bit quicker than you feel the car can do. But providing you use the camber with the front of the car, you can really, really gain speed through there, and to the point where you can actually give it throttle between 1A and 1B or turn 1 and 2. Pierre Gasly, I thought, looked absolutely brilliant through that today, the way he's using the front of the car. Very sad to see Jack Doohan have that shunt going into 1A. I'd say 90% of the problem there is he wasn't given a run in FP1, just put into the car for FP2. Jack had raced at Suzuka before in Asian F3, but it's basically he was a rookie going into this in a Formula One car. They gave Ryo Hirakawa, who is their nominated reserve driver, a run in FP1. I suppose that's okay. He's Japanese, it's the Japanese Grand Prix. But because of that lack of practice, and because he wanted to get on with the program, and because he's an oversteer driver with great car control, Jack Doohan went into 1 with the DRS still open, which ultimately I think falls under the heading of poor management from the garage. And I feel very sorry for Jack for that, because he should never have really been put in that position of having to push so hard so soon with things like that rising to the surface. And then it was a big shunt. It's always going to be a big shunt if you have oversteer going into 1. It's always been the case at Suzuka. It's definitely a front-end corner. And I think it's really interesting in that context to see how well Isaac Hadjar went today. I've been saying how well he uses the front of the car. We saw that in China in spades. And again, here at Suzuka, as a rookie, using the front of the car. And if you do that and you manage the understeer, Suzuka just comes into play for you. And that's what Isaac Hadjar is doing very well. Other rookies to shine were Kimi Antonelli, who again, not brilliant through the fast and medium speed corners, but absolutely fabulous through the chicane section and also out of the hairpin as well, really putting the power down well. This guy drives so well on slow corners. And that's not to be patronizing. That's to say, wow, this guy, he's going to get some results, because think how many slow corners there are in Formula One these days. So yeah, he's doing very well. And the other driver I thought did a very good job was Oliver Behrman in the Haas. He did have an updated floor, but he was pretty near Esteban Ocon, and Ocon is very quick around Suzuka. And actually, I should add also to the rookie list of honor list today, Gabriel Bortoleto, who was also very quick in the other Sauber, right up there with Nico Hülkenberg, a little bit like Oliver Behrman versus Esteban Ocon. So good performance from both those two guys. Let's just talk about some of the other teams. Mercedes, very, very good. George Russell, as expected, super quick around Suzuka, but absolutely on the limit. No margin for error at all in the laps that George is putting together, compared with the way Lando is able to drive the McLaren with that softer touch, using about the same amount of road in terms of going into corners and coming out, but doing it with a softer touch, giving himself a little bit more. And as a result, partly because of Lando's touch and partly because the McLaren has such a big sweet spot now, he's able to have more margin for error. And I think that will show up in the race. It's difficult to imagine that Mercedes can do a lot more with their car at the moment. It is a very quick car, but it's an edgy car still compared with the McLaren. Ferrari, yeah, kind of as expected. They're going to be there or thereabouts. Charles Leclerc, as I say, just again seemed to be asking a little bit too much of the car on the change of directions. He's definitely getting into the corners early, looking really nice. But it was a fractious session, as Charles said. Glad that one was over in terms of the Reds getting out there, getting in there. Lewis Hamilton, again, very good. Looking, dare I say, very like Carlos Sainz. Wide turn in, braking in a straight line. We're still not seeing the Lewis that we saw in the great McLaren and Mercedes days, but maybe this is the Lewis we're going to see for the rest of his career. It's a more conventional Lewis, but it's a Lewis that I guess is methodically getting on top of the car and everything he can do and all the parameters. And maybe somewhere like Monaco, maybe we'll see him doing something different, going into Rascasse, something like that. But at the moment, he's looking very like Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. But the Ferrari looking quite good. Definitely not in the McLaren class, but definitely able probably to race somewhere near George Russell going into Sunday. But in many ways, the big story is Isaac Hadjar and then Liam Lawson also back in the Racing Bulls, both doing 28.5. Isaac slightly quicker, and Isaac's time making him P3 ahead of the Ferraris and the Mercedes, and of course the Red Bulls. Just a superb lap. And what a driver this is. I did say after Melbourne and again in China that he definitely has a feel for short corners. And it's what we're seeing today. Absolutely brilliant. Loving it, just driving the front of the car beautifully. And Liam Lawson definitely more aggressive with his inputs, but putting in the same lap time. Whether he can reproduce that as much as Isaac can, as I'm sure Isaac can, is another matter. But good to see Liam going back and just driving on gut instinct again in a car that obviously has a bigger sweet spot than the RB21, the A car. And in some ways really showing it to the Red Bull A team, because he was quicker than both Max and Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki Tsunoda, for his part, very, very good, particularly in FP1. Didn't get a proper run on the soft tyre in FP2, so don't read too much into his relatively low position there. But he was right there with Max in FP1, looking very good. For his part, Max Verstappen definitely didn't have any oversteer issues, like Liam Lawson, but he had chronic understeer in the RB21. That is not a good thing. Obviously, they're going to try and dial that out overnight going into Saturday. And that might give him a half reasonable car. I mean, at least he's not complaining about flick oversteer and terrible acceleration runs. And they should be able to get rid of some of that overnight. But Max Verstappen looking like a driver who's been there, done that. And until the car now has some sort of grip level, he's not really going to push it to the absolute limit. Difficult to tell watching trackside, because he still looks the same whether he's on the limit or not. He drives the car beautifully. And again, out of 6 into 7, Max right up there with Lando Norris in the way he was positioning the car, doing such a good job there. The other place I thought Max looked fabulous was going into Spoon. I'm amazed that he wasn't quicker than he was, actually, because going into Spoon, the double apex left before the long straight leading into 130R, he was just sublime through there in terms of using as little road as he could going in, getting the car rotated at exactly the right moment. A difficult car with understeer, but you could almost see in your mind's eye the way he was juggling the the pedals there, the footwork between the brake and the throttle, and then getting out of the corner. Lewis, very good through there as well. Got to say, Lewis, fabulous through there. And then I thought Pierre Gasly, as I said, really good into turn one. And the Alpine, nothing like as good as a Mercedes, for example, but Gasly getting the absolute limit from it. And that in the context of the Jack Doohan shunt, it's a very unfortunate situation. And when Jack was coming out of the medical center, no concussion, he's going to be okay. The question is, will the car be okay for tomorrow? You've got to, I'm sure his biggest worry was, am I going to keep my drive? Is this the end of it? Because, you know, for him not to be given any FP1 on a circuit he's never seen before, and the circuit is Suzuka, probably the most difficult on the calendar to get your head around. It was a big ask for Jack Doohan, but you can see in the background that he's in the crosshairs of Flavio, and I guess it'd be no surprise if he was replaced sooner rather than later, which is a shame because we haven't yet seen the best from Jack Doohan, and he is very quick. There's no doubt about that. Carlos Sainz kind of there or thereabouts with Alex Albon now. Still not very happy in the car. Williams didn't have a brilliant day by their standards. They've been going quite quickly this year. So it's still kind of sad to see Carlos there in the Williams. At one point, even, I think, got confused in the pit lane where he was supposed to be stopping, the red car or the blue car. Yeah, such is life. And the other team not to have a good day was Aston Martin. But before we get on to that, a quick word break just to tell you about Ayrton Senna's Lotus 98T Renault, the car he drove in '86. When he won only 2 Grand Prix, but 8 poles, and was unbelievably competitive throughout the season. I remember it well. I was at Williams, of course. And just to let you know that REC Watches, one of our new partners on this channel, have produced the most amazing timepiece around this car, taking an aluminium plenum tube, which is basically the upper inlet manifold, and reforging the aluminium from that into this exquisite timepiece. You can see the actual workings of the watch in this glass case, and it is just wonderful to have that sort of thing on your wrist, knowing that there is a part of Ayrton's iconic black and gold Lotus 98T close at hand. REC Watches do other cars as well, but at the moment this of course is the crown jewel. And just to let you know, you can order this watch with a 10% discount by going to the Peter code in the description below this video. And now back to Friday practice at Suzuka. Yeah, Aston Martin, Fernando. I've often talked about Fernando's unbelievable car control, which you never see because it's all in footwork, and the way he just manages the car with the brake and throttle after quite an aggressive initial violent turn-in. And I often get viewers asking, you know, why don't I ever rate Fernando right up there with the very best with Max or Charles or Lewis? And I say, well, it's because he does have this weird initial turn-in. You know, it's really aggressive, and that's the way he drives. He just loves to be able to do that with the car, and providing he's got the car going, then he knows he's got the confidence in his own ability to handle that with his footwork. And 9 times out of 10 it works for him. But it didn't work for him out of Degner 1. Well, going into Degner 1, he did one of these, classic Fernando, and the car just went like that. And I don't know. I'm not going to say it's because he's a little bit older now, and a younger Fernando would have held that moment. I think if you combine the energy he puts into that initial input with the characteristic of these cars, they're still bouncing. They're still getting bouncing around Suzuka, and probably had a bit of bouncing on the rear as well. And probably the card isn't giving him a lot of feel, and it just went straight off. And you know, that is one of the downsides to Fernando's initial turn-in like that. So in closing, I guess the final thought is McLaren, Oscar Piastri versus Lando Norris, please advise. Oscar quickest again. Lando looks to be quicker over the lap. Lando should get the pole. Lando should win this one. But if he has an issue or Oscar gets the pole, it's going to be very difficult again for McLaren to manage. China was okay because there were some cars between them, but here they could very easily be on the front row of the grid, and then, you know, it's going to be a problem for Zach Brown to think about how he's actually going to manage that. But having said that, as I say, for me, the advantage, looking at the way Lando is driving today, it looks like one of those Lando Norris weekends coming up. So yeah, should be good. Suzuka looking wonderful in the spring, and the Red Bulls too looking wonderful, I thought, in white with some red. Honda white, Honda red in celebration, is that the right word? Or farewell to Honda after all the success they've had with them. This is their last year with Honda. They're moving to Ford next year. Honda are going to Aston Martin. And here at the Japanese Grand Prix at Honda's circuit, in those colours, really nice. And reviving thoughts of that wonderful 1960s Formula One car and Richie Ginther winning the 65 Mexican Grand Prix. It was the last ever race for the 1.5 litre Formula One cars. Beautiful car, that. Very, very quick. Of course, at high altitude, V12, transverse mounted V12. First win for Goodyear tyres as well. And Red Bull kind of reminding us of the livery, if nothing else. And I think Max quite impressed with what that car looked like and what it was doing. Anyway, good to see that respect for heritage. Can't say the same for F1 though. Got to say this at the end. F1 are celebrating 75 years of Formula One, and that began for them 1950 British Grand Prix, the first round of the FIA World Championship. Of course, Grand Prix racing, as we know and love it, existed long before that race. But anyway, let's start at 1950, and it is 75 years since then. And as a result, quite a lot of stats are now coming out of Liberty Formula One from some department there. I don't know what, but anyway, they've got the right people, I guess, statisticians, to talk about the heritage of the sport going back 75 years. And this was in the program at the Australian Grand Prix. And this is stuff not edited by the local editors of the race programs at individual races. This is the stuff supplied by Liberty F1 to the local program editor, and it's an official F1 Liberty program. And here you can see the list of world champions since 1950. Jim Clark won it twice, but he didn't according to this. Jim Clark with an E won it twice. Can you believe that? Can you believe the misspelling of Jim Clark's name in an official F1 statistical page? It's an absolute disgrace, I think. And then also constructors. It's an interesting idea that the statistician department there came up with, which is to nominate the drivers or to mention the drivers that were part of the constructors winning championship in any given year. Except that 1961, Giancarlo Baghetti won the French Grand Prix for Ferrari, one of the most significant wins of all time because it was his first ever Grand Prix and he won it. And he's not mentioned in Ferrari's 1961 Constructors' Championship. And look at this, 1974, McLaren won the Constructors' Championship, and they got Jochen Mass, who's not very well at the moment, we wish him well, and David Hobbs, old Hobbo, big mate of mine. I'm sorry, Jochen Mass and David Hobbs did not score any points for McLaren in 1974. So what are they doing there? And yet they don't include Giancarlo Baghetti in 61. Statisticians at Formula One. I mean, it is just appalling. Anyway, that's the end of my rant on this occasion. Thanks for watching. We'll see what happens at Suzuka tomorrow. Saturday qualifying for the Japanese Grand Prix. Take care. Max Verstappen and the RB21 were about at spoon when the celebrations began in the McLaren garage. Lando Norris, fairly typical qualifying session for him these days in Q3 anyway, a below par opening lap, which left him only P5, but a scintillating lap in the closing seconds of Q3, apparently to take the pole, the only driver under the 127 barrier. As I said yesterday, Lando looking great in the car, and McLaren Mercedes definitely have the best package around Suzuka. And Oscar Piastri, who had been quickest in the first phase, then seemed likely to be on the front row, another front row lockout for McLaren. But here was Max. There'd been a few purple segments on this lap, and he was at spoon now. The checkered flag was out. Nobody at McLaren was really watching, I think. They just felt that the normal margin McLaren have over Red Bull, we'd seen it today. The Red Bull was a little bit better, less understeer. Max had put on a little bit more front flap after Q2 as well, when he said the front tyres still weren't working. But still, the margin seemed likely to be at least 0.2 of a second. Max came around 130R through the chicane, beautifully clean, and took the pole from McLaren. An unbelievable performance from Max Verstappen, Red Bull, given where they were yesterday with the understeer. And a great result too in many ways for Lando Norris, because it now means that his teammate Oscar Piastri relegated to the second row of the grid. And with rain predicted for the race on Sunday, this pole will take on even more significance for Max Verstappen. He's got a nice clean run into turn one. And then, of course, if he can get the lead, he'll have a clear road ahead of him. So how did Max do it? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff out there about this is one of the greatest laps ever driven around Suzuka. But how did he actually do it? Well, I mentioned turn one. Take a look at these statistics right now. This is exactly the same point for all three drivers on the entry into turn one. You can see there Lando Norris 262, still in 8th gear. Oscar Piastri a little bit quicker. He's already gone down to 7th. But look at Max Verstappen at exactly the same place into turn one. But that is approximately 20 kilometers an hour quicker than both McLaren drivers in a car, arguably, that is not as good as a McLaren. So how's Max doing that? He's doing it with his sensitivity and feel and his touch, most of which Lando has these days, but he's also doing it by going into the corner a little bit earlier and therefore carrying more speed into turn one and then into the braking area into turn two. Using the front of the car, using the camber there. That's what Max was doing, which the McLaren drivers weren't. If you look at Lando's lap, it was a really nice lap, but then oddly, and I think this was probably due to crosswind, he had to brake going into turn six, a cardinal sin going up through the S's to use the brakes at all. Oscar didn't touch the brakes, but Lando braked into turn six, and that would have cost him time. Of course, that comes under the heading possibly of being patient and making sure he had the car beautifully positioned for 7, which I was talking about yesterday, and didn't run too wide, but that would have cost Lando time as well. But if I had to sum it up, I would say that the difference between Max and Lando on those 2 laps, effectively pole laps when they were recorded, was that Lando's were longer corners than Max Verstappen's. Everywhere Max was going in a little bit earlier. And there's a very good example of how much a very, very good short corner driver, a great short corner driver, will always beat a great long corner driver in almost identical circumstances. And I think Christian Horner summed it up when he said it was just pure class from Max Verstappen. And it was. And at no stage did the Red Bull look as if it was on the absolute limit, which again is the epitome of the art. Max managing all the dynamic weights absolutely beautifully with his foot and hand work. Just superb to watch. Where did it get away from Oscar? I would say it got away in the second Degner when he was on the power a little bit sooner than Max and slightly more aggressively. Max was very patient through the Degners. I think that was one of the hallmarks of his lap. And patience, as I said yesterday, is one of the key elements of driving the lap of Suzuka. And Max had that. He never allows himself, when he's under pressure and potentially he's got a pole out there, he never allows himself to get ragged. He always keeps things contained in the correct capsule, and that is surrounded by patience, just waiting for the car to be ready to do what he wants to do next. And when he's putting on the power, and you can see it from his throttle traces, he's doing everything in a very, very smooth, progressive way. And he's never going to give it throttle that he knows he's going to have to come out of. And that, of course, comes under the heading of Lando Norris breaking into 6, which, of course, he'd never have wanted to have done. And that says it all, I think, about the talent of Max Verstappen. Charles Leclerc, P4 for Ferrari. I think he got the best from that car, looking really good. Very, very good out of 6 into 7 as well. One of the key areas. Very good into turn 1. 27.2, yeah, considerably quicker in the end than Lewis Hamilton, 0.3, 0.4 of a second. And that's what you'd expect around Suzuka for Charles. He's very, very good there. So a good performance for him, particularly as he out-qualified George Russell and Kimi Antonelli and the other Mercedes, the 2 Mercedes drivers. I said yesterday it was going to be very close between Ferrari and Mercedes, and so it proved. Mercedes sandwiched either side by the 2 Ferrari drivers. George Russell, 27.3. I think he'll be a bit disappointed with that. To me, it went away from him out of turn 2 when he gave it too much throttle, and he asked too much of the car then getting into 3. That then discombobulated him going up to the S's. By the time he got to the top of the hill going into 6, he had to ask so much of the car to get it back across for 7 that he was just putting too much energy through the tyres and the car. And as for Kimi Antonelli, that's exactly where he lost all his time. He was running much too wide out of 6. I'm surprised that he didn't see A, what George was doing, or B, that the engineers didn't get him more fired up about that, because he still looked really good at corners like Spoon, corners like the hairpin, and he wasn't bad into 1 either, particularly the chicane he was good, but up the exit of the S's, the top of the hill of the S's, yeah, that's where it got away from Antonelli. And as I keep saying, medium, high-speed corners, he doesn't have the confidence yet to use the front of the car in the way he can in slow corners. But a good job nonetheless for Antonelli to qualify 6. But I think that's more a reflection that George didn't get the best from the car today, possibly just overdriving in the last phase of Q3. Isaac Hadjar, absolutely superb in the 7th. This guy is just getting better and better. Had a lot of problems with the seatbelts in Q1 and Q2. They got it right got into Q3, which was a major achievement given those issues. Liam Lawson didn't, and that says a lot, I think, already about how quick Isaac Hadjar is, because Liam Lawson going back with no pressure in that car, it's obviously a very good car, but unable to get into Q3, just looked ragged compared with Isaac Hadjar, who's using the front of the car beautifully. And Ollie Berman, as I said yesterday, looking very good in the Haas. Very darty, very George Russell-y, but he got it there, and very good. Excellent performance for him to get into Q3. They gave the new floor to Esteban Ocon today, but it didn't make a lot of difference. They always talk about that on the Fridays, and one driver had this, one driver that. We'll put both cars to the same spec, and look what happened, Ollie Berman right there. So very good performance from him. Lewis Hamilton, 8th. He'll be disappointed with that. Again, long corners, braking in a straight line, quite abrupt steering inputs. Does not look like the Lewis Hamilton of the great eras of McLaren and Mercedes. So I don't know how long we're going to have to wait for Lewis to really find his sweet spot there, but I would say he's mystified at the moment. And Alex Albon, 27.6, exactly the same time as Lewis Hamilton. Alex in the Williams Mercedes got through into Q3. Carlos Sainz didn't. Very close between those two, though. Alex Albon should be really, really pleased with that performance to be right up there again. Williams looking stronger and stronger almost with every race. Pierre Gasly, unlucky not to get into Q3, did a good job for Alpine, as I said yesterday. Carlos Sainz. Fernando Alonso probably got the best from the Aston Martin, but what a dismal performance. What a dismal weekend for Aston Martin so far. Dismal start to the year. I mean, Adrian Newey, please advise. I know it's not his car, but nonetheless, you know, a lot of changes over the winter. Tom McCulloch's been moved sideways, things like that. Andy Green no longer there. I'm surprised that Aston Martin haven't got it more together by now. Liam Lawson, I suppose his only consolation was he did out-qualify Yuki Tsunoda. They were very, very close in lap time. And Yuki, disappointing again. It went just like Kimi Antonelli, went away for him at the top of the hill in the S's. You would imagine a driver like Yuki. I don't actually think he had that much experience at Suzuka when he did start in Formula One. It's a bit like Mario Andretti when he got the pole at Watkins Glen in 1968. He'd never actually been to the Glen before, but everybody assumed because he was American, he knew the circuit like the back of his hand. Probably the same with Yuki, but top of the hill, running so wide out of 6, he just had no chance of getting the car into 7 without having to come out of the power, and that cost him his lap for sure. And that was under pressure right at the end of Q2. So not a good performance from Yuki Tsunoda, actually. I would have thought he won't be happy with that at all, and he should have done a better job than that. Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto, yeah, obviously got the best from that Sauber, not going anywhere at the moment, is it? Jack Doohan went out again today, kept his nose clean. But again, very, very big ask for Jack to do anything other than just get the car into the race, which he'll be doing starting P19. And Lance Stroll, P20, very, very slow in the other car, caught out by the wind as well, crosswind. And now a quick word again about that amazing Lotus 98T watch produced by REC Watches, limited edition run. The details will be in description. But parts of this watch are actually made by the aluminium, reforged aluminium, from the Lotus 98T chassis number 4 that Ayrton drove in 1986, and it's from a plenum tube. And we had a few comments after the video yesterday saying, oh, well, if it's a plenum tube, maybe it was a Renault part, not a Lotus part. Of course, the plenum chamber comes and goes with every Renault engine change, but the plenum tubes connecting to the plenum chamber were made specifically by Team Lotus, Ali Parts, and that is the actual tube that was on the chassis 98.4. So really, really interesting detail there. Thanks to Chris Dinage at Classic Team Lotus for that info. And of course, the other point to remember is that this was the last of the black and gold Lotus as well. So it's got a certain place in history, and very quick in that car. Much to our annoyance, I was at Williams, as I said yesterday, at the time in 1986. If I think about 86, obviously I think a lot about Nigel's drama in the Australian Grand Prix, but also other races that went away from us too, and how annoyingly consistently quick Ayrton always was in that Lotus Renault. Beautiful car as well. Gerard Ducarouge design. Take my hat off to Gerard. One of the great unsung heroes, I think, of the Formula One engineering world. So yeah, have a look in the description. You can pre-order the REC watch based on the Lotus 98T. And in addition to the discount on the pre-order, you will get another 10% if you mention the word Peter in your order. Two quick things before I close. One is, let's really hear it for the Verstappen family, because as I speak, the Rally Sierra Morena is taking place in Cordoba, not far from where we are here in Spain. And right now, Jos Verstappen lying 6th on that rally. Very, 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 very impressive entry list there as well. Nikolai Grayson actually leading in his Skoda Fabia, but Jos in a Rally 2 Fabia as well. And also, just testing, basically, Terry Neville and Elfyn Evans taking part. That's what I love about rallying. I mean, it's just like, oh yeah, Max will be doing a small rally next week. And the other thing, finally, is this. You'll remember yesterday I had a bit of a rant about Jim Clark's misspelling, the Clark with an E, by Liberty Formula One in the race programs, official race programs for 2025. Well, almost pure coincidence, but arriving in the post last night, odd times postal deliveries are made in Spain, was a gift. It's my birthday coming up, actually. I don't know if it was that. From my friend Diego Moreno, lovely guy, Mexican who lives in Madrid, but very good journalist, does quite a lot of work with the FIA as well. He was at the Australian Grand Prix, nothing to do with the program issue now, but unbelievable coincidence. And it was this. Unbelievable. I'm going to debox it right now because it's one of the nicest things I've ever seen. And wow, look at that. A 24 scale Lotus 25. I would say almost perfect in its detail. Just fabulous. That's the 63 Lotus 25. And number 4, you see the roundel, sort of half roundel there. That was typical Team Lotus. They obviously put on a different top cockpit section before the race and hadn't got the roundel on that. There wasn't time to put it on. That's why it's cut in half. Number 4, that would have been Jimmy's 63 British Grand Prix winning Lotus 25. So thank you very much, Diego. What a great present. I've never even seen that, never even seen this make of model either. Look at that. It's Italian. Leggendari Odo da Corsa. Thank you very much, Diego. So there we are. Wet race tomorrow. Max Verstappen on the pole. 2 McLarens behind him. Then Charles Leclerc. Then George Russell. Bring it on. See you then. Okay, no doubts about this one. The 2025 Japanese Grand Prix was a case study in how we don't need lots of overtaking for it to be a dramatically tense Grand Prix from start to finish. Beyond that, it resulted in what is my opinion, Max's finest dry weather win since, I don't know, US Grand Prix 21 when he beat Lewis on inferior tyres. But this was sensational. Obviously, it was a factor of Max winning the pole, that amazing pole when he had those incredible entry speeds into turn 1 compared with the 2 McLaren drivers. And from the pole, Max controlled the race. But he was under pressure from start to finish. The McLaren, without doubt, was the better car. And yet Max made no mistakes, looked after his tyres perfectly, and won the Grand Prix by what? A second. Unbelievable pressure the whole way. Every time he would have glanced in his mirrors, which wouldn't have been very often, he would have seen orange. Usually it was Lando Norris that he was thinking about. But of course, there was pressure from Oscar Piastri on Lando. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But for Max Verstappen, this was an amazing recovery from a poor Friday when he did have understeer. He got the pole with that astounding lap. And having got the pole, and there being no rain, even though rain was still being threatened on lap 20, there was no rain. It was a dry race. Max didn't have the benefit of the wet, if you like. He still beat the 2 McLarens. Just outstanding work. Max had problems with upshifts, particularly in Sector 1 in the early part of the race, but Red Bull quickly rectified that within a lap or two. Later on the radio, we did also hear from Red Bull that Max had a potential issue with the flap adjustment not going correctly, or the incorrect amount of flap being put on the car at the pit stop. But it didn't seem to affect Max, as is normal for Max these days. Just a wonderful drive. And now let's get on to the 2 McLarens, because had Oscar Piastri out-qualified Lando Norris, and it was very, very close, of course, but had he done so, and had he been in P2 behind Max, and maybe he even had out-dragged him into the first corner, but let's put that to one side. Had he been behind Max, you get the feeling that it would have been a tighter, closer, more aggressive race. Lando appeared to be lulled quite early on into the mode of, it's impossible to overtake around Suzuka, even though there is DRS. I want to be as near as I can to Max without damaging my tyres, without being in dirty air. And he just sat there, basically, waiting for Max to make a mistake, I guess, or possibly a strategic move that might enable him to get the lead with an undercut. That didn't happen. McLaren tried it, rather clumsily, I thought, by getting out on the radio and saying, come in, Lando, box, 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 try to take the lead with this, take the lead with the box, to see if Max would be lured into that, or Red Bull would be lured into that. They didn't. They kept going. They kept Lando out. And then the following lap, Max did come in, however. And at this moment, probably because they'd gone through that ruse already, McLaren decided to follow him straight in. And well, that didn't work. We better just stick with what Max is doing. I think that was a mistake. I think they should have kept Lando out for another lap just to see what he could do, because what was going to be the result of coming in on the same lap, both going out on new sets of hard tyres. As it happened, those stops were quite close. McLaren's garage is right at the far end of the pit lane, at the bottom end of the pit lane going into turn 1, whereas Red Bull's is 3 or 4 down the road now as a result of the 2024 Constructors' Championship results. Max's pit stop was slightly slower, and he was in the pit lane, droning along at the speed limit. When Lando rejoined, he was ahead of Lando, absolutely no doubt about this, and which means, of course, that he could basically use whatever bit of track he wanted to within the realms of the white boundary lines. But Lando sort of nudged up alongside him, and I guess was thinking, just for a millisecond, oh, maybe Max will back off and let me have this position. Of course, Max was never going to do that in a million years, nor did he need to. He was in front. We're talking still in the speed limit zone here. And then when they gunned it, Lando stayed there and got onto the grass on the right and got onto the radio saying, oh, he forced me off, he forced me off. We saw it, Lando, we saw it. Don't worry, we'll be taking. Of course, no action was taken. And I think that, coupled with the whole business of trying to lure Red Bull into coming in a lap early, and then Lando presumably would have stayed out had they fallen for that. It was all a bit clumsy by McLaren. And then beyond that, Oscar Piastri, from the second half of the race, when they were all on hard tyres, the leaders that is, was demonstrably quicker than Lando, was throwing the car around a little bit more, was aggressive, wanted to have a go at Max, let's put it that way. And I think it's kind of strange that McLaren didn't let him have a go at Max. We've seen that with other teams in the past, maybe even McLaren, I can't really remember, but certainly with other teams, okay, let's see what we can do, and if it doesn't work, we'll go back and hold positions. I think that would have been worth it, because for sure the McLaren was a better car, and for sure the Red Bull was going to be harder on its tyres, but I think it would have been worth letting Oscar have a go, if only to wear Max down and then let Lando take the position again. Maybe McLaren are so concerned now about team orders and how to control their drivers, they just don't even want to go there. And I think this goes right back to the Hungarian Grand Prix, as I said at the time. The minute you start doing that sort of thing that they did in Hungary last year, when Lando had a clear win, and yet they told him to give the win to Oscar Piastri, and then we had Monza and we had a few other incidents as well. The minute you go down that path, it becomes uncontrollable. They've obviously got themselves in a mode now for 2025, which is, above all, we'll be conservative and we make sure we don't tread on the toes of either of the drivers. And I think they missed an opportunity here. They definitely had a better car around Suzuka. Yeah, it is almost impossible to overtake around Suzuka. But if you push a guy hard enough and his tyres do start to go off, a guy like Oscar Piastri can pass a guy like Max Verstappen on the outside of turn one. It is a passing place. And Piastri has the flair to do that. And yet we never saw that. And all credit, therefore, to Red Bull and Max Verstappen for enforcing that situation at McLaren. McLaren was sort of restricted in everything they tried to do today. And it was all because of the perfection of Max and Red Bull and how well they did the job. Absolutely brilliant, I thought. And it's difficult to quantify how much slower the Red Bull is for the lap around Suzuka than the McLaren. In terms of specific lap time, as we saw in qualifying, can be very, very close, although I think a lot of that pole was Max Verstappen. But I do think that the McLaren was much better on tyre management than the Red Bull, and is right now. It's got a much bigger sweet spot, and McLaren did not exploit that today. They will probably think, oh, well, you know, our decision to have two great drivers in the car is really justified because even though we're second and third, we've got a whole bounty of Constructors' Championship points. Yeah, boring. You know, you want to win the race. Max Verstappen's out there. He's a racing driver, wants to win the race. And I think Oscar Piastri does too. That's the feeling I got. I think Lando just did a really good professional job and just signed off out of the win quite early on the basis that it's impossible to overtake. And that was kind of sad to see. Charles Leclerc in fourth place, I thought drove as well as anybody in the race, probably as well as Max Verstappen, because he had pressure from George Russell all the way through this Grand Prix. And no doubt in my mind, again, that the Mercedes was a slightly better car than the Ferrari around Suzuka, bigger sweet spot. And yet Charles, no mistakes, just like Max. And I've often said, you know, I used to say Charles, Max, Lewis. Now I'm saying Charles and Max, because Lewis, again, we'll get onto that in a second. But yeah, wonderful drive by Charles Leclerc. George Russell did everything he couldn't get past, but I think he was a little bit more aggressive than Lando was. He was very close and on occasion and pushing Charles hard. And then Kimi Antonelli, very, very good drive by Kimi Antonelli on the same tyres as everybody else. Started on the medium, went to the hard, but a long stint on the medium to the point where he led the race to become the youngest driver ever to lead a Grand Prix. Interesting stat. And his nearest rival at that point was going to be Lewis Hamilton, who'd started on the hard tyre, uniquely amongst the top runners, started on the hard tyre. And found it quite difficult early on, but now was going to be the benefit for Lewis, switching onto the medium for the back half of the race. And Kimi in front of Lewis at this point. Kimi versus Lewis. Wow. And Kimi pulled away from him. Lewis could do nothing about it. And on the medium, he was actually quite pathetic in the Ferrari. Very, very disappointing. He'll probably say, well, you know, something weird about the tyres. But the mediums didn't look too bad in the first phase of the race. And here was Kimi Antonelli, the new recruit at Mercedes, blowing away Lewis Hamilton in the other Ferrari in a race where Charles Leclerc's running fourth. So this was not a good day for Lewis again. I did say in the Saturday video, or the Friday video, I think, that Lewis is still straight, breaking in a straight line, wide turn-ins. And I think this is all starting to come back to bite him now because Charles has got a significant advantage over him. and he could do nothing about Kimi Antonelli. And there was even a sort of very uncomfortable bit of radio transmission from Lewis towards the end of the race when he said, where am I losing time? And they said, well, you know, turns 8, 9, which is Degner. You know, you don't want to be losing time through Degner. It's all understeer. Very, very difficult part of the circuit where you've really got to manage the car well. Yeah, I know, but how much? I mean, what a question. When you can see Kimi in front of you and they're telling you that that's 2 corners where he's quicker than you, what's it going to be? A 10th here, a 10th there? It's never going to be more than that because you're only about a second behind anyway. And Lewis quite irate, you know, but how much? Okay, a 10th, Lewis. Okay. And then nothing happened anyway. So, yeah, another frustrating day for Lewis Hamilton watchers at Ferrari. And as I said yesterday, I think he's just confused as to where he is with his driving and where he is with the team and how good Charles Leclerc is starting to be, to show, and where he's at. And, you know, to get beaten by Kimi Antonelli, the guy that replaced him, the young guy that replaced him at Mercedes, won't have been pleasant either. So, yeah, a long flight home for Lewis, on to Bahrain from Lewis, because this is a triple header. It's the first of a triple header. Can you believe it? Ugh. As I said at the start of the video, not a lot of overtakes in this race, but still it was a great Grand Prix. But one of them was, one of the really good ones was Isaac Hadjar, would you believe, on the outside of Carlos Sainz going into turn 1, on the way to finishing 8th, only 8 seconds behind Lewis in the Ferrari. Excellent performance from Isaac Hadjar. Liam Lawson basically nowhere in the other car. And already, as I said yesterday, he looks like a real star amongst the rookies, alongside Kimi Antonelli and Oliver Bowman, who translated his P10 in the difficult-to-drive Haas Ferrari into the final points position in Suzuka. Lots of pressure on him as well, but he drove beautifully. Excellent performance from Bowman to finish P10, just behind Alex Albon, who again had another good race in the Williams Mercedes, even though he spent a lot of time on the radio moaning about the upshifts on the Williams, along the lines of the problems that Max faced, already described in the early part of the race. A quick look at the other results. Fernando Alonso was the guy that was putting pressure on Bowman. He finished 11th. Having Alonso behind you for the entire Japanese Grand Prix, that green Aston Martin, and it's Fernando. Not an easy thing, and that's another reason I say how well Oliver Bowman did drive in this Grand Prix. So Fernando 11th for Aston Martin, another very disappointing weekend for Aston. Yuki Tsunoda 12th, rather uninspiring, made up a little bit of ground, but not a great day for Yuki Tsunoda's first drive in the A-team. A lot of people will say, Peter, you're being very unfair there. He did a lot better than Liam Lawson would. Yeah, but this is Yuki Tsunoda. He's got a lot of road dust now. It was his home Grand Prix. It would have been nice to have seen him it would have been nice to have seen him qualify better for a start. And then secondly, into the top 10, into the points would have been a good result for him, but he didn't get that. But as I said, from day one, this was always going to be a big ask, putting him in the car for the Japanese Grand Prix, home race, the amount of pressure and spotlight that he's had. Now he can breathe, go to Bahrain. He'll probably get a very good result under his belt in the next 2 races, I would have thought. The Alpines are nowhere. Pierre Gasly tried hard, drove well, but they don't have the pace at all. Jack Doohan also drove well after the big shunt on Friday. They finished 13th and 15th, Alpine. Carlos Sainz was all over the place, locking up, didn't look comfortable, hasn't looked comfortable, isn't comfortable in the Williams Mercedes, but is trying to make the best of it, obviously. And the Saubers, as before, were just not in it today. Fastest lap went to Kimi Antonelli. Really good performance, good reward for him. He finished only 1.3 seconds behind his teammate George. Really good drive. Obviously his tyres were newer towards the end because he had that very long first stint, but that was the reward for looking after the tyres so well in the first stint. And of course, to reiterate, he beat Lewis Hamilton, who was on the mediums and was pulling away from Lewis. So excellent performance, and just underlines how difficult a day it was for Sir Lewis. But it was Max Verstappen who emerged from the RB21, no sweat, to win his 4th consecutive Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka, a feat not matched by Senna, Schumacher or Hamilton. Obviously a hard race, flat out from the start. I say flat out, there were moments when they could say to Max, push a little, and he'd push and he'd go purple in sector 1, and then Lando would immediately respond. And I think it was the way Max managed the lap as much as anything that won in this Grand Prix. He didn't really put too much emphasis, as I said right at the beginning of these 3 videos on Friday, into the S's, because the S's don't make the Suzuka lap. Impossible to overtake there, obviously. That's why he was conserving his tyres. And he was always a match for McLaren through sector 2 and sector 3. Sector 2, oddly, they said to Lando at one point, you're losing to Max at the hairpin. I mean, of all places to be losing time at Suzuka, the hairpin. And yet when you watched it, you could see every lap Lando seemed to have more mid-corner understeer than Max. He didn't have any understeer. He was just driving around on rails on the outside offline, as you always do around that hairpin. And yet Lando always seemed to be seemed to have understeer there, seemed to have more power, more throttle on. And I thought that was telling. He never seemed to change in that area. And that's where Max could always pull away a little bit from Lando. He could conserve the tyres in this car that wasn't as good as the McLaren. He could conserve it through Sector 1. And then he could just do what he needed to do, float with the car and let it breathe through Sectors 2 and 3. And it always gave him the cushion he needed to sustain his lead. It was just incredible management, incredible presence of mind as well. You don't get a lot of managing of Max on the radio. He just does it himself. It's instinctive. And that is so nice to see as well. So yeah, what a win. And to win the race in the colours of Honda, white with the red, that have been around since 1964 when they entered Formula One for the first time with their own team. And to win Red Bull's last Grand Prix in Japan with the Honda power plant, power unit, was just a fitting end, particularly in April, particularly with the blossom out there as well at Suzuka. What a wonderful weekend it was for the Honda Red Bull blossom fraternity. For McLaren, yep, they'll be putting on a brave face saying, yeah, great, second and third, mega. They got soundly beaten today by a phenomenal racing driver in a slightly inferior car. And that's what they take to the next two parts of this triple header. Don't forget also the amazing REC watch based on the Lotus 98T Renault driven by Ayrton Senna in 1986. These watches, limited edition number of these watches, made from the actual aluminium from the plenum tubes on that car, reforged into the casing of the watch. Just amazing to see. REC specialize in this sort of thing. They've done GT40s, they're doing V8s, they've done the Blackbird. Really impressive use of original material. And I've traced this plenum tube to the inlet manifold of the 98T. Of course, the plenum chambers changed with the Renault engines, and a number of different Renault engines, of course, were used throughout the season. But the plenum tubes were made by Team Lotus and attached to the plenum chamber. So that's an integral part of the car, made by Team Lotus. Made by Team Lotus in 1986. Now in these watches that you can buy or order anyway. Pre-orders now open, and you can see details of how to order that, the website to go to. And if you quote the name Peter Windsor, you get a 10% discount as well. So an amazing timepiece to have with a part of black and gold Ayrton Senna racing history on your wrist. Thanks for watching, and see you again very soon as we do our regular videos from Bahrain on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Big thanks to our partners, to Jetcraft, the world's largest buyer and seller of executive jets, to OEM Exclusive, the passionate suppliers of OEM upgrades for exotic and high-performance vehicles, to Track Ninja, a lap timer and data app designed to help users improve their on-track car and driver performance through analysis and an innovative data garage, to REC watches and that fabulous 98T special edition timepiece, to Alpine Stars, the makers of cutting-edge racing safety equipment and apparel, and to Oscar Razor, Australia's highly rated 5-blade razors for men and women. Watch out for the first edition of Grande Épreuve, your quarterly Formula One Super Slick mag brought to you by Oscar Razor. Links to all these great companies in the description below our videos. And finally, you can stay in touch with us by following our Motor Racing with Peter Windsor WhatsApp and YouTube communities platforms. And check out the language editions on all our YouTube videos. Just go to settings and select your preferred audio track. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more from Bahrain this weekend.